New York, 2010. Travel back exactly 100 years when a young Indian with a mission arrived in this city and was surprised by what he called the great rapidity of things. He brought with him the ancient wisdom of Sufism, and his aim was to inspire the West with a new vision of God. The name of the young man with the piercing eyes was Inayat Khan.
So much of our lives are spent in experiencing outer experience through our outer senses. So much of our work, so much of our striving to maintain our material existence, so much of, even regretfully, religion and belief these days have become more material, more outer. And here's someone who said, touch the inner and touch the outer. Bring the two together and you will create your own experience of God, and which is unique to you and is the gift that you've brought here, you as a human being. And it's a gift that every human being has.
The divine message is the answer to the cry of souls, individually and collectively. The divine message is life, and it is light.
It's the depth and the wisdom of his teaching. It just speaks to your heart, directly to your heart. It's not that complicated, not totally intellectual, but again, it is very much rooted in everyday life and living.
What does it mean to be in the world and not of the world? What does it mean to be of service to humanity and not just to myself? How can I soften to better serve the greater purpose?
If anybody asks you, what is Sufism? What religion is it? You may answer, Sufism is the religion of the heart, the religion in which one thing is most important, and that is to seek God in the heart of mankind.
The young man from India was to leave an extraordinary mark in the West in a very short time. The Sufism he taught appealed to people looking for something spiritual, but less narrowly prescriptive and more inclusive than the religions they knew.
People believe salvation comes from just being a member of a religion. This is a man-made idea, not God-made. God is the Father of the whole world, and all are entitled to be called his children.
Sufism is not a religion in the sense that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are religions. They are mutually exclusive in their outer form. But Sufism is a spiritual path that is compatible with and which lies at the heart of all of the great revealed traditions.
Inayat Khan taught the universality of Sufism, the belief that in essence all religions look towards the same light and share a human longing for the divine. He devised a worship service with candles or lamps and scriptures on the altar, each representing one of 6 great world religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, A seventh represents all those, known or unknown, who have held aloft the light of truth. Above, a lamp stands for God, the divine light.
Any concept of God is just a concept in the end. It's just an idea. And some ideas might be more satisfying than others, but in the end, they're all just ideas. And ultimately, Sufism is concerned with getting beyond ideas and getting to experience.
Inayat Khan's legacy can be found in the immense quantity of material that he left behind. He was a prolific lecturer, and these books and papers recording his talks are carefully preserved and treasured for the wisdom they contain and for what they tell us about the man himself. In charge of the archives is Professor Donald Graham. Like most who have been initiated into Sufism, he has a given Arabic name. In his case, Sharif, meaning noble or honored.
Inayat Khan was born in Baroda in the state of Gujarat in India in 1882. And he was born into a remarkable family of musicians. He just was bubbling with enthusiasm about music and, in fact, became so proficient. He sang in what is called the Drupad style, and he played the veena, the ancient instrument said to have been invented by Shiva himself. And quite early on, he started traveling to the courts of the Maharajas, where regularly they held contests for musicians. Almost always he would win these contests, and when he would win, he would get a big gold medal. It was real gold, it was worth something, although later on he lost them. He left them behind in a taxi.
But while the young Inayat was enjoying success as a musician, it became clear that he was also unusually spiritual. The discipline of Sufism required long hours of meditation, of emptying the mind to tune into the divine. At its most advanced stage, it leads to a state Hindus call samadhi, when the person meditating feels at one with the whole of creation. Inayat Khan developed this facility at an early age. For 3 years, the young man studied with a famous Sufi mystic called Abu Hashim Madani.
And it was after this very intense period that his teacher was nearing the end of his life and gave to Inayat the commission to, he said, fare forth into the world, my son, and unite East and West in your music. Spread the wisdom of Sufism abroad, for to this end you are gifted by Allah, the merciful, the compassionate.
New York in 1910 was an affluent, bustling, modern city where ragtime was all the rage. It was a very different world in every sense from the one Inayat Khan had left. He had brought with him from India his brothers and a cousin, and the 5 young men called themselves the Royal Musicians of Hindustan. They made their living giving concerts to fascinated but probably rather bewildered audiences. At that time, Indian music seemed impenetrable and mysterious to Western ears. But for Inayat Khan, music was at the center of everything, the quickest way to the heart and the most direct line to God.
He used music to reach the state of samadhi. And he said that normally that takes a number of hours of meditation to achieve that state. But by the help of music, he says, one could reach it within half an hour. So his great theme was really that the aesthetic experience, once that becomes contemplative, kind of contemplative aesthetic is really the thing which leads most readily and most easily in a way to that kind of meditative state of mysticism, to that samadhi which they are in search of.
The mystics of all ages have loved music most, and those who attain to that perfect peace which is called samadhi do this more easily through music. The effect that they experience is the unfoldment of the soul, the opening of the intuitive faculties, and their heart, so to speak, opens to all the beauty which is within and without, uplifting them, and at the same time bringing them that perfection for which every soul yearns.
He also said the future religion of humanity will be music. And he emphasized that all of the religious differences, all of the disputes that people have are because our beliefs are expressed in words. And as long as things are expressed in words, you can have arguments about the meaning of those words.
People in the West were brought up with the idea of an all-powerful and remote God far away in heaven. Sufism turned that on its head, saying that every human being can experience God directly. Most revolutionary of all was the idea that God created humankind to reflect his own divinity.
So creation, the emergence of the universe, can be understood on the same principle, that the eternal life felt the need to express itself, to release something that was hidden in its own depths. And in the language of the Sufis, this is the hidden treasure. According to a sacred tradition, God speaks and says, "I was a hidden treasure, and I long to be known, and so I created the world that I might be known." And so the universe was breathed out, Nafas ar-Rahman, as a great sigh of compassion. The whole flaring forth of the universe is the exhalation of God, seeking release, seeking expression and witnessing. We all come from this motive force, God's own desire to know him herself. And we are the representatives of that desire, the delegates of the desire, propelled on the waves of that longing, that yearning.
In Sufi poetry, you also find, I am the eyes through which God sees. I am the ears through which God hears. I am the feet through which God walks. I am the hands through which God creates things. So we are an instrument for the divine. And we are very necessary. And this makes a very great difference in the way you look at your life and at yourself. It changes so much if the awareness is there that this is my purpose, and I just have to be completely myself. I'm a unique being, and by being myself, I am the best instrument for the divine to discover itself or to get to know itself.
If every human being embodies the divine, there is no need to look beyond the world we know to regulate our lives. Sufism has no formal rules, no dogma. Inayat Khan urged people to observe the natural world around them and train themselves to understand what it had to teach.
there is one holy book, the sacred manuscript of nature, the only scripture which can enlighten the reader.
By this, he does not mean that all the holy books are not valid, but he means that what they are referring to is also evident throughout the creation. That, in fact, for the person who has come to realization, the leaf of a tree is a page out of the holy book. That everything that exists speaks of its creator, of its divine source, if you can only learn to hear it.
Inayat Khan's message resonated with many people who were disillusioned with conventional religion. After the First World War, he traveled widely in America, England, and Europe, lecturing and teaching. The number of his followers grew rapidly. They all called him Murshid, or spiritual guide. They were attracted not only by what he had to say, but also by his remarkable personality.
Suddenly here was a person who seemed to speak with authority from his own knowledge of things, and that greatly impressed people because their own clergymen didn't talk that way. Then there was also what you would call his charisma. He just gave people the impression that not only did he have this great knowledge and this kind of spiritual power, but also that he cared deeply about them personally. Somebody who could speak directly to their own hearts.
In the 1920s, he settled in a suburb of Paris, in a house he called Fazl Manzil, meaning House of Blessing, where he held meetings and gave lectures. In an age in which men dominated business and politics and religion, Inayat Khan was emphatic about the importance of women, not only in his organization, but in the world.
I see as clear as daylight that the hour is coming when women will lead humanity to a higher evolution.
He appointed 4 women as leaders or murshidas: Rabia Martin, Sharifa Goodenough, Sophia Sainsbury Green, and Fazl Mai Echling. He had married an American, Aura Ray Baker, in 1913, and together they had 4 children. There are very few people today with first-hand memories of Inayat Khan. His younger son, Hidayat, is over 90 years old.
Of course, for us, 9 years old, he was like a grandfather, but at the same time, a father and even a friend. Because, of course, when he was at home and when we were just together in the family house, he played with us like every loving father does. One could imagine a prophet of the olden times. One could imagine a very inspiring sage, and also one could imagine just the most loving personality. He was so tremendously noble. He didn't pretend to be it, but he was it. He could not move without doing it in a noble way. He could not walk without doing it in a noble way. And when he talked, it was a noble way of talking.
The elder son, Vilayat, who was eventually to become a successor to his father, remembered the power of his personality.
On Saturday evening, there were no lectures during the whole day. The Murshid would start meditating. He would sit on the roof, or the terrace of Hazrat Manzil, and he would get into a state of samadhi, and he would be in that state throughout the day. And then in the evening, he was in such a high state that he couldn't walk. So we would have one person on each side, taking him up to the hall, and then people would have to sit in silence in the hall, and he sat, there was a curtain, and he sat behind that curtain, and each murid would come up and sit before him for a few minutes. And then he would just open his eyes, look into their eyes, close his eyes again, and then they would move on to the next person. And those were, of course, the most sacred moments. And I remember Shadil, who was the national representative in Germany, whom I met afterwards, and he said, looking into those eyes, it's like looking into heaven. He said, it was just like you're looking into heaven.
In 1926, Inayat Khan was 44 years old, and he was filmed at a ceremony in the garden. A foundation stone for a temple of all religions was being laid. There were now several thousand of his followers in America and Europe, and many believed that he already wanted his 10-year-old son Vilayat to succeed him. A few weeks later, he left for a visit to India, and shortly after, the shocking news arrived that he had fallen ill and died. Every year, on the anniversary, there are ceremonies at his tomb in Delhi, India. His followers come from every corner of the world to pay their respects. For many people, he is quite simply the most important figure in their lives.
Hazrat Inayat Khan was someone who, the beauty of the essence of what a human being can be shown through so elegantly. And his words carry that, his atmosphere that we see in photographs carry that. And then when you visit with your own inner feeling and connect to what you feel that ideal is, you connect with that sense of beauty that arises from liberty. And for me, and for many of the people here, Hazrat Inayat Khan is the most elegant and beautiful example of a human being who manifested that.
There's certainly Sufi thought and belief about life after death. You know, it's one of these great mysteries, you know, that it's hard to know. But there's a Rumi poem that I like that kind of, it says, on the day I die, while I'm being carried towards the grave, don't weep. Don't say he's gone, he's gone. Death has nothing to do with going away. The sun sets and the moon set, but they're not gone. Death is a coming together. The tomb looks like a prison, but it's really a release into union.
Pour upon us thy love and thy light. Give sustenance to our bodies, hearts, and souls.
Today, 80 years on, Inayat Khan still seems very much alive, even to generations born long after his death.
Thy joy and thy peace.
I think of him as a friend, actually. More than anything, I think about him as a friend. and the kind of friend who is completely accepts me as I am, and at the same time is always someone to look up to. So it's this wonderful role of, when I'm stuck trying to work something out, one of the questions that comes up for me is, and what would Murshid do?
After the funeral ceremonies, the question of succession arose. He had talked of wanting his son Vilayat to succeed him, but the boy was only 10 years old, and his 3 uncles assumed the leadership. When Vilayat came of age, he started a parallel association, which he called the Sufi Order International, and became its peer or spiritual leader. Meanwhile, the original Sufi movement continued to be run by Inayat Khan's musician brothers, who had been spiritually trained by him personally. Each in turn became leader of the movement, but music remained a central part of their lives. Mahbub Khan wrote songs and set many of Inayat's words to music. Ali Khan, who followed him, became known for his great gifts as a healer. The youngest of the 3 brothers, Musharraf Khan, was an outstanding storyteller. He was head of the Sufi movement until his death in 1967. During his time, the Sufi movement built a striking temple on sand dunes by the sea in Holland, where Inayat Khan had liked to walk. Vilayat was an extraordinary man who brought his own energy and intense spirituality to the Sufi order. Music was as important to him as it had been for his father, but he gave up his formal studies to take on the responsibilities of leader. As a young man, he loved to climb mountains and rode a motorcycle. He was a fine cello player and studied at the Paris Conservatoire. In the Second World War, he served on a minesweeper that was sunk. His eldest sister, Noor, was another gifted musician and a deeply spiritual pupil of her father's. She volunteered to work with the French resistance, then was betrayed and shot by the Gestapo. After the war, the Paris house became a centre of activity, although, like his father, Vilayat travelled constantly.
And now, instead of identifying with the physical light, you identify with the light of intelligence.
As he grew older, membership of the Sufi order increased, particularly in the 1960s and 70s. He set up summer camps, and his teaching resonated with young people.
So that is the most important moment in one's life, when one decides that one is going to take it upon oneself to be of service. One needs to be very clear as to what one is promising. One must never make a promise that one can't keep. It happened to me several times in my life, of course, because my mother wanted to spare me all the hardships that it means to be the head of a Sufi order. I wanted me to be a musician, and there was a moment when I think I must have been 16 or 17, when I pledged myself to prepare myself for the mission of spreading the Sufi message at all costs. It's a pledge. And there's no turning back then.
Many of today's Sufi followers were attracted by his charisma.
Sometimes it was like an eagle just penetrating through your being, just the way he would look. And people would say, oh, he was just speaking to me. It had that kind of impact. Or he would look with just the most kindness in his being at a person. And, you know, they would just feel seen in this deeper dimension of their soul.
Around this time, he met his partner, Taj Inayat.
He had incredible both endurance and fragility combined, which I think is a unique combination of qualities. In some ways, life was a fight. And yet he had a joy and a way of lifting people and inspiring them.
Taj and Pir Vilayat's elder son was destined to succeed his father.
I hand to you the rosary of my father and your grandfather.
Shortly before his death, Pir Vilayat formally initiated Zia as the next leader of the Sufi order.
The universe is inviting us, urging us, compelling us to become more fully who we are.
Das Universum drängt uns.
Today, Zia is spiritual leader of the Sufi Order International, the largest of the worldwide organizations that trace their origins to the same root. The international Sufi movement, the Sufi Ruhaniyat, the Sufi Way, and the Sufi Contact all take their inspiration equally from the teaching of Inayat Khan. Today, there are more of his followers than ever before. Sufism attracts people of all ages and backgrounds. At summer camps or retreats, experienced Sufis and newcomers spend time together and explore the inner journey that can lie ahead.
Life is not just a blessing, which it is, but life is an incredible responsibility if we choose to take it. Because we each are the agent of God's potentiality. And if you want to believe that this all-powerful oneness stopped living and changing and growing and experiencing, then in a sense you're committing heresy, because you're saying that God can't do that God has to be fixed. And I don't believe that we're here for that. I believe we're here to allow ourselves, our intelligence, our hearts, our souls, our personalities, to be an instrument through which the universe can begin to become personal, intimate, to love and to be loved and to feel loss and to feel gain and to be perplexed, to not know everything, to experience it but not to know everything. There is a place.
My greatest aspiration was to know the truth, to realize the truth, to be able to see beyond appearances. And something within me knows that there is a higher reality, there is a greater truth than the one that is known to us by our physical senses, and to be able to reach that truth and to live it.
There's sadness in our lives, there's sadness in this world. There are people in this room who've undergone great tragedies, lived through great, great tragedies, inexplicable tragedies. That's part of the human condition, because it's...
For those who feel a deep, profound, personal call to undertake spiritual study, well, then one has to find out which path to follow. These paths are rooted in sacred tradition. These paths are well-trodden paths. And what Murshid brought was one such path. And for the one who feels a certain resonance with Murshid, with his being, with his words, and so forth, perhaps one is called to this particular path.
So we could do a meditation, would that be all right?
Meditation is one of the most important of what the Sufis call the practices, methods to train the mind and the heart to become increasingly aware of the inner truth.
Imagine yourself dissolving so that instead of becoming a sensory receptor with our physical senses receiving inspiration, we become consciousness, that which receives the inspirations from the outside.
It is a discipline that is learned by passing through stages of concentration and contemplation, and ultimately leads to realization. It becomes a habit fundamental to a Sufi's life.
The mind in its untrained state is like a wild horse. It gallops in all directions whenever it has a chance. And part of practice is to train the mind to hold steady and to discover that we're not at the mercy of the mind and whatever it wants to do, but we are the master and we can control our minds.
In seeking God, in attaining spirituality, we do not need to use so much intellect, because this does not come by the intellect. It comes by the tuning of the heart.
The point is to be in tune. The analogy is to a musical instrument. You are like a musical instrument, and you're there for the master musician, that is God, to play on that instrument. But if the instrument is out of tune, if the strings are broken, if you know, the sounding board is damaged in some way, then the music is not very good. It's not possible for even the greatest musician to play well on an instrument that's not in tune. So the idea is to become in tune, and then you become the divine melody being played. And this is very agreeable not only for you, but also for the people you encounter.
There are those with great worldly responsibility who have found benefit in balancing their inner and outer lives. Karim Baksh Witteveen, one of the leaders of the Sufi movement, was once the Dutch Minister of Finance and head of the International Monetary Fund.
I think it made it much easier for me to fulfill these functions with their difficulties and great responsibilities, because in your meditations, when you continue that is important. You must continue it, must not say I have no time. That is a mistake, because doing it makes it easier for you to carry out these responsibilities, because you can, every time in the morning and the evening, you can detach yourself from these responsibilities, the worries, the concerns, these problems that otherwise will all the time continue in your mind and tire you. And you have these moments of rest that you can detach yourself, then you are fresh again when you come to your office to take the decisions that have to be taken. It's great concentration, forgetting yourself, but also not too attached to how it will work out.
I feel that ultimately, in meditation, we're coming back to the essence of our own lives, and to see that it's not only our own lives, but there's an interconnectivity that we have with all of humanity. And that's very important. But there's so many kinds of practices that we do that bring us into a meditative state. And well, for me personally, music is very important. And this is what drew me to the path to begin with. Creating music, singing together with people. I find that a way of harmonizing on a very deep level so that the mind just takes a vacation and I can really open up to what is revealed in the moment for me.
Sing out.
Music and movement have always been central to the Sufi experience. They belong to a deep place in the human psyche.
Hold hands, full turn.
The dances of universal peace were not part of Inayat Khan's original practices. They were a later innovation by one of his pupils, Murshid Samuel Lewis, and have become very popular in some of the Sufi organizations.
We have a great blessing in the Rouhaniyat that during Murshid Sam's life, he received inspiration to move, hold hands, and sing together. So it's very common at any gathering that we hold that the first thing we do is we hold hands in a circle or many circles. And the moment you hold hands, you feel affection, you feel part of a family, you feel interconnected. And then when you move in rhythm and you sing, the cares of the day, the worries, the anxieties, they find relief in community and in prayer, in ecstasy and joy and sharing. Because of the blessing of those practices and how appealing they are, they've led people to our door.
I think the dances appeal to a certain personality. And there's some people that they come into the dances and they feel very uplifted. And they feel a sense of optimism and hope that perhaps was lacking in their life. So that may be a doorway into the Sufi teachings. But there are many doorways into the teachings. In the Sufi movement, we don't, the dances have not been part of our repertoire of practices.
I think it is a matter that people are attracted to different personalities. People express in different ways. I use words, for example, and I love music, so I may use music. But maybe I'm not that familiar with or comfortable with leading dances. So my way may not be a way of attunement through movement. It may be a way of attunement through conversation. It may be a way of attunement through music. It may be a way of attunement through laughter, through humor. I think that's all that happens.
But then there are many other practices which take you deeply into your own experience. Practices using the breath, practices using different wazifas or sacred phrases.
Bismillah, Rahman, Rahim. Bismillah, Rahman, Rahim.
When the heart is not sympathetic, there is something missing in the mentality of man, and it is sympathy that opens it. The Sufis know the medicine for this disease, and it is the practice of the art which is called zikr.
The word zikr means remembrance, remembering the divine. Wanting to have every breath be in that kind of awareness. There's different types of zikr. There's silent zikr, there's spoken zikr, there's sung zikr, and there's personal practice of zikr, there's group zikr. So you put yourself into this remembrance, most often using one of the 99 names of Allah. Even if we didn't know the meaning of the words, the sounds have such a value in and of themselves, not only that they've been repeated for such a long time and by so many people, but also just the sound quality that brings something out of us. And by the repetition, we're really offering ourselves in a deep prayerful way to have this experience that is not separate from our source.
So we don't get to know God through speculation, through philosophical syllogisms and so forth. We get to know God by clearing the slate, getting back to what is primal, getting back to what is primordial in our own being, in our own consciousness. So for this to be possible, we have to more and more get beyond notions, concepts, and that is a part of our essential practice, which is the zikr, which involves saying, first of all, La ilaha. And that means no God. And when we're saying that, we're wiping the slate clean, removing all preconceptions, all notions, all concepts, and going right down into the inner depths of our own being. La ilaha, no God, illa Allah, except Allah. And when we say except Allah, that does not mean no God except the God that we happen to believe in. Instead, it means not my knowledge of God, but God's own knowledge of God through me. Not my little self, my personal self, speculating about what God might be like, but myself splitting open and unraveling and becoming a transparent medium through which the essence of the universe, sheer reality, reveals itself to itself. And then we incline the head toward the heart and say, who brings that knowledge, that divine self-knowledge, right down into the heart, into the essence of our own life story.
For the serious student of Sufism, these practices are deepened by a lengthy and rigorous study of the teachings of Inayat Khan.
There are two kinds of studies. One kind is by reading the teachings of the great thinkers and keeping them in mind, the study of metaphysics, psychology, and mysticism. And the other kind is the study of life.
And it is to everyday life that the Sufi must return, balancing the inner and the outer experiences.
Sufism is about saying, okay, where am I right now? What am I deeply yearning for? And what is getting in my way of finding that? And then you begin to do the work of, deeply exploring oneself, one's relationship to other people, to society, to everything, every organization and individual we interact with. And it's not always fun, but there is something that comes out of it that is deeply liberating, and we find aspects of ourselves that we never knew existed.
It allows you, if you open your heart and open yourself up, it allows you to connect with humanity and bring out the qualities of compassion and empathy and connect to the suffering that's going in the world. And hopefully it compels you to want to participate in trying to find solutions to those problems.
Sufi teaching lays emphasis on the importance of going out into the world and connecting with fellow human beings, particularly those in need. In a deprived neighborhood in Delhi, close to the tomb of Inayat Khan, the Hope Project brings education, medical care, and self-respect to the very poorest children. It was Pir Vilayat's inspiration and is still supported by the Sufi order in collaboration with the Sufi Ruhaniyat.
The end and the sum total of all mysticism, philosophy, and meditation, of everything one learns and develops, is to be a better servant to humanity.
Murshid speaks of the smiling forehead, that when one is attuned to the sacred, though the mouth may not be smiling, the whole countenance seems to radiate light. And when you look out with your eyes, you look through the glance of the prophetic glance, the glance that sees the divine in all appearances. فَإِنَّمَا تَوَلُّوا فَثُمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Wheresoever you turn, there is God's face. All of the senses become outlets for the prophetic consciousness to which you are attuned. And when you walk in the prophetic footsteps. And then, faced with challenges, faced with threats, faced with pressures, one does not react, but rather one acts from the depths of one's being. One is prepared to face whatever may come. One will be God's witness. One will serve. Wherever light may be spread, wherever hope may be kindled, wherever tenderness may be offered, one will serve.
To the glory of the omnipresent God, rekindle this light, symbolically representing the traditions of the great goddess.
The universal worship is a worship that Murshid got inspired to in the beginning of the last century. And at this time, it was really revolutionary.
Symbolically representing the Hindu religion.
This idea to take a big altar and to put all the different world religions on this altar in the form of a candle and in form of the sacred scriptures for all the religions.
Symbolically representing the Buddhist religion, the Zoroastrian religion, the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, the religion of Islam. We kindle this light, symbolically representing all those who, whether known or unknown to the world, have held aloft the light of truth through the darkness of human ignorance.
Titi Malkutach, Nechwe Tevyanach Aikana, Devashmaya Afgeara.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
Was soll ich tun? Was soll ich lassen, damit ich wachen Herzens voll begreife und niemals vergesse?
We honor these different religions by reading from the different scriptures that, of course, contain the thinking of people at the time when these scriptures were developing. But they also were all inspired by the divine wisdom. So we invite people from all religions to celebrate this unity. One religion fights against the next one, and so many wars are just coming from the background of my God is the right God and your God is the wrong God. And if you honor your God, then you are a heathen or you are a non-believer. This is a contribution that we have as Sufis for peace in the world.
Most gracious Lord, Master, Messiah, and Savior of humanity, we greet Thee with all humility. Thou art the first cause and the last effect, the divine light and the spirit of guidance, Alpha and Omega. Thy light is in all forms, Thy love in all beings, in a loving mother, in a kind father, in an innocent child, in a helpful friend, in an inspiring teacher. Allow us to recognize Thee in all Thy holy names and forms, as Rama, as Krishna, as Shiva, as Buddha. Let us know Thee as Abraham, as Solomon, as Zarathustra, as Moses, as Jesus, as Muhammad, and in many other names and forms known and unknown to the world. We adore Thy past. Thy presence deeply enlightens our being, and we look for Thy blessing in the future.
We have a certain number of days left on earth. We don't know how many. We have a certain number of encounters, meetings, experiences, ordeals. We don't know how many. But this we know, we are in service. Nothing can change this. We have been brought forth out of emptiness to serve. The earth has churned out these bodies that with these hands we may serve. We will serve and then we will disappear. It will slip back into the earth and this body will be soil again and water and birds and fish, and this spirit within will fly back to its source with news from the frontier. What news shall we bring? The story of our heart.